What's up, my friends, and welcome back to the Pin Drop Shop. Today I wanted to talk to you about bias tape. So you might be wondering, what even is that? Well, bias tape is not really a tape as an adhesive tape, but it is a strip of fabric that is folded and pressed. So it's either folded a few times or just one time. So that would be single fold, double fold. We'll get into that. So you may know that fabric has a grain. It also has a cross grain, and then the diagonal that goes through the fabric is called the bias. If you turn it on the bias, the diagonal, it magically has a little bit of give. And we're going to use that give to our advantage by making it into bias tape. So if you cut your strips on that bias, fold it up into your single fold or double fold bias tape, then when you're ready to use it, it's going to go around those curves so easily because it was cut on the bias. It's going to just be able to form right around those curves the way you want it to, unlike if you were to cut it straight. If you do decide to make your own, these are called bias tape makers. You feed the fabric through the top part, and when it comes out the bottom, it is already folded twice. The reason we have bias tape is for facing the inside of garments. So it's used as a facing for necklines and for sleeves. It's even used for hems. So what is a regular facing, and what are we replacing by using bias tape? A regular facing is just a piece of fabric that is cut to the shape of a neckline, and then it's sewn to the outside of the garment, right sides together, and then pushed inward, and then finished with understitching or top stitching. This is what makes the neckline look nice and smooth and finished and look like there's nothing really to it. You can make it look invisible so there is no stitching. So this is the purpose of having a facing. If you don't have a facing and you just have the entire bodice or piece lined, then that would be the same thing. This is one that has a lined bodice, so you can see that the lining and the outer fabric come together right at that edge that forms that opening. This is the Metamorphic dress by Sew Liberated. You can get this pattern on our website. It's a really fun pattern for a reversible dress. So I imagine that a lining is how things used to be done, and then maybe somebody decided, well, I want the neckline to still look good, but I don't want to line it, so maybe I'll just cut a small piece here, and it'll only be part of the neckline, and maybe they called that a facing. And then probably people wanted something that wasn't so flappy inside of the garment, and somebody brilliant came up with bias tape facing. So it's just a little skinny strip that functions like a facing, but it takes up no space at all. It's super clean, and it doesn't flap or wrinkle or need ironed all the time. So that's what it is and why we use it. I really like to use contrasting bias tapes. I think it adds a really fun touch. I'm really about anything where you peek inside and you just barely see that detail, that special detail. So I really like to use bias tape as a little pop of something extra. Bias tape is not only used for facing openings in garments. You can actually go ahead and sew it down and then make it so it's basically a ribbon, and you can use that as a tie or a strap or a drawstring. And that's a lot easier than the method of sewing an inside-out drawstring and then trying to flip it right side out. There is single fold bias tape, and there's also double fold bias tape. Single fold bias tape means it's folded one time along the length of the bias tape. This is typically used for quilting. So when you apply it to your quilt, you'll close it so it's folded in half, and then you'll stitch it to the quilt, and then you'll flip that to the other side and you'll stitch it again. So single fold is usually used for quilting. Double fold bias tape is usually used for the garment applications. So there are a few mistakes to avoid. The number one mistake is just not using it. So you might be wondering, if you're a beginning seamstress, why can't I just cut out my neck and turn it under, press it, and stitch it, just like at the bottom of my skirt, just like a hem? Well, you can, but it's not gonna look right, and this is what it's gonna look like. It's always gonna be flopping to the outside and bunching weirdly and just sticking out and just never laying flat. And that curve is never going to be able to lay flat because you didn't treat it as a curve needs to be treated. You pushed it to the inside, and that extra fabric has nowhere to go. So that's just not the right way to do it. So you need to face it or use a bias tape. You can see here that I have some rippling and some puckering. No matter how much I iron this down, it's always just a little bit like that. And that is because I stretched it when I sewed it. So that is one mistake that you want to avoid, is making sure you're kind of pulling it taut, but you're not stretching that when you put it on. You're not stretching the bias tape or the garment. You can see here, I made this one just a little bit too narrow. So when I went to fold it, it barely encases the seam allowance, so it just feels like a bulky tube in there, which is okay, but it is not perfect, and it would lay flatter if I had made it a little bit wider. You can also see here that the black bias tape finish is coming to the outside a little bit, forming this little peak of the black, which I actually really like. So that's kind of something you can choose to do if you want to. Normally you would want to fold it to the inside and maybe give a little extra fold to make sure everything's unseen, or maybe if you want that little peak of that little other color, you could roll your bias tape so it's a little more visible. So when you're making your bias tape for your garment, it's always advisable to just use the fabric that you're using for the garment, or make sure it's the same type of fabric, especially as in weight and fiber content. Because if you use something that's a little bit too thick, like I did here, this is what's going to happen. It's always going to be flopping to the outside. It's going to feel really heavy in relation to your garment, and it's going to feel pretty bulky, and you're always going to notice it there. It's never going to be quite right. So this was a cotton lawn that I used, and I tried to use a regular quilting weight cotton for the bias tape. So it's still good, but it's really not perfect, and that's why. In this other case, you can see that I made a knit hoodie, and it's stretchy, and it's flimsy, and it's not very structured, so I chose to use a contrasting bias tape made out of a quilting weight cotton that is not stretchy. So I combined the stretchy fabric with the non-stretchy fabric, and I used that bias tape just to cover these edges inside, and I think that gives it a really nice effect. So if you're going to be using bias tape that's not what your garment is made out of, just be aware that it's going to affect the neckline, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. Okay everybody, well thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked this video on bias tape. Hope it answered some of your questions, and if it did, or if you liked it, or if you had anything else to say, please give my video a like. I really appreciate that, and please comment down below. I would love to hear what you have to say. So let's hear what you have to say about bias tape. Any questions, any comments, any applications you've used for it that were unusual, anything like that, let me know. Also, please subscribe to our channel. We put out a weekly video on sewing deep dives, machine maintenance, alterations, sewing inspiration, things like that. So make sure you subscribe to the Pin Drop Shop channel. That way you won't miss out on a video. And if you need to pick up any sewing supplies at all, go over to our website and peruse all the goods that we have there. Thank you so much again for tuning in, my friends, and until next time, happy sewing!